All right, so you're thinking about maybe giving Anne of Green Gables a read, but uh, not sure if it's worth the time.
Well, let me just say right off the bat, Anne of Green Gables is a truly delightful read. It's full of warmth and humor, and you really connect with the characters. It's one of those books that just sticks with you.
Hmm. Okay, I'm intrigued. So who exactly is this book for? I always see it in the children's or young adult section, but something tells me it's a little more than that.
You're right, it is. There's definitely a reason it's considered a classic. Younger readers will connect with Anne's adventures, but it really does appeal to a wide range of readers. Adults revisit it all the time and find new layers of meaning they didn't see when they were younger. It's kind of like those Pixar movies that work for kids and adults.
Okay, I see what you mean. So what about the writing itself? Is it kind of overly sentimental or what?
One thing that surprises people is how funny Ellen Montgomery's writing is. It's surprisingly witty and clever for a book written back then. Not at all what you'd expect.
I do love me some humor. Give me an example of this unexpected wit.
Oh, there's so many. But here's one that always makes me chuckle. When Anne first shows up at Green Gables, Marilla Cuthbert is shocked to find they've been sent a girl instead of the boy they requested. So Montgomery writes, if Marilla had said that Matthew had gone to Bright River to meet a kangaroo from Australia, Mrs. Rachel could not have been more astonished.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty funny. So we got the humor, we got the charm. What about the actual story? Give me the rundown, but no spoilers.
Okay, so basically the story is about Anne Shirley. She's an 11-year-old orphan, and she gets mistakenly sent to live with Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert. They're a brother and sister who live on a farm called Green Gables.
Wait, so Anne gets sent to Green Gables, but they want a boy. That sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Or maybe some really funny mix-ups.
You got it. The whole book is about Anne navigating this new life, trying to fit in with the Cuthberts and everyone in the quirky town of Avonlea. It's a very episodic story full of incidents, some funny, some heartwarming, some a little dramatic.
Okay, speaking of dramatic, I've heard some people say that Anne is a bit much sometimes, like a little overly dramatic and even kind of childish. What do you think?
Oh, she can be, for sure. But that's part of what makes her so relatable. All of Anne's flaws are right there in the open, from her temper tantrums to her over-the-top pronouncements. But her flaws also make her growth throughout the book that much more satisfying. She learns from her mistakes, she grows up, and in the end, her kindness and optimism shine through.
Ah, the classic character arc we all know and love. But let's not forget the other characters. We've got Anne, but who else should we be paying attention to?
Well, you've got Matthew Cuthbert. He is immediately charmed by Anne, and he's just this kind, gentle soul who's the opposite of his sister Marilla.
Marilla, the stern but loving one.
You got it. She's all about practicality and tradition, which Anne is constantly challenging. Then there's Diana Barry. She's Anne's bosom friend, as Anne would say. They have all sorts of adventures together. And of course, we can't forget Gilbert Blythe.
Gilbert.
Yeah.
He's the one who calls Anne carrots, right? Because of her red hair.
He is much to Anne's dismay. That whole incident sets off this rivalry between them that adds a little tension. It's fun to see how it all plays out.
Enemies to lovers, a classic trope. But does it work with these characters, or is it predictable?
Well, that's something you'll have to decide for yourself when you read it. Montgomery does a great job with their relationship. She lets it develop naturally over time.
Okay, I'm sold.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Anne is a classic. How does it compare to other classics like Little Women or Little House on the Prairie?
That's a great question. Actually, one reviewer compared all three and said that they thought Anne was better than Little House, but not quite as good as Little Women.
Wow, tough critic. But what makes Anne stand out from the crowd?
I think it's the mix of humor warmth and a really strong female protagonist. She's not afraid to speak her mind, she's independent, and she really embraces her imagination even when other people think it's weird. It's something that still resonates with readers today.
I can see why this book has stayed popular. It sounds like there's a lot to unpack here, both the story itself and what it means.
Absolutely. Anne of Green Gables gives you a glimpse into a simpler time and place, but it also explores themes that are still relevant today.
Yeah, I'm getting the sense that it's more than just a charming kid's book. It seems like there's a lot to think about.
Oh, there is. The best way to experience it is to just dive in and see what speaks to you. It's amazing how Montgomery takes Anne's imagination and uses it to explore these deeper themes.
Yeah.
It's not just about being a kid and having a wild imagination. It's really about finding the good in everyday life and using that to cope with hard times.
You know, that actually reminds me, one thing that came up in the reviews was how Anne's past is handled. But she went through some rough stuff, but it seems like she bounces back pretty quickly. Some readers thought that wasn't very realistic.
Yeah, it's true. The book doesn't really go into the psychology of Anne's trauma the way maybe a modern book would. I mean, it was written over 100 years ago, and the way people thought about children and trauma was very different
So
then.
you're saying we got to take that into consideration.
Exactly. But even then, Montgomery does show us how Anne copes. Her imagination isn't just her being whimsical, it's also how she deals with her past. It shows how strong people can be, especially kids.
I see what you mean. So her imagination is kind of like a superpower.
Right. Okay, so moving on, a lot of the reviews also mentioned how descriptive Montgomery's writing is, especially when she's describing Prince Edward Island.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Just reading those descriptions,
Yeah.
I felt like I was there. She really creates a whole world with her words.
She really does. She uses such vivid details. You can practically see, smell, and hear the island. She makes those landscapes come alive, like the Lake of Shining Waters or the White Way of Delight, as Anne calls them.
Those names are so perfect. They make you feel like a kid again. But one reviewer said something interesting. They said that when you're a kid, you identify with Anne, but as an adult, you connect more with Marilla. What do you think that is?
You know, that is a great point. I think it's because Marilla's character is so complex. On the surface, she's strict and practical. She's all about rules and doing things the right way. But as the story goes on, you see her soften up. Her love for Anne really changes her.
It's like she's growing up right alongside Anne.
Exactly. And for adults, especially those who have kids or take care of kids, there's something familiar about Marilla's struggles and rewards, trying to raise a kid like Anne. It's that balance of discipline and letting them be themselves.
Yeah, and maybe we can even learn something from Marilla. I mean, she's not always perfect, but she clearly loves Anne a lot, and she comes to appreciate her for who she is.
Absolutely. Anne of Green Gables isn't just a sweet escape. It also makes you think about tolerance, understanding, and connection.
I like that. So it's not all sunshine and roses. It has some depth to it. So what are some of the big themes or messages that readers take away from this book?
Well, besides imagination and finding beauty in everyday things, there's a big focus on friendship, kindness, and belonging. Anne is always looking for her kindred spirits, people who really get her and appreciate her for who she is.
I mean, isn't that what we all want? To find people who get us?
Exactly. And the book says you can find those connections in the most unexpected places, even with people who seem totally different from you.
It's like that saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Or maybe, don't judge a red-headed orphan by her dramatic outbursts.
Right. On top of that, Anne of Green Gables looks at the challenges and wins of growing up, the importance of education and improving yourself, and how strong people can be when things are tough.
So it's got a little bit of everything. We've talked about the Netflix show.
Yeah.
Are there any other adaptations worth mentioning?
Oh, there are tons of Anne of Green Gables adaptations, movies, TV shows, plays, even musicals. There are a few different movies, including a silent film from way back in 1919. And of course, there's that mini-series from the 80s that everyone loves.
Oh, yeah, the one with Megan Follows. I used to watch that all the time as a kid.
A true classic. And if you want something a little more modern, there's that animated series, Anne of Green Gables. The animated series. It's really cute.
So many options.
Yeah.
This story really speaks to people across generations. But I think it's time to get to the bottom of this. Is Anne of Green Gables worth reading?
I think we've shown that it is, but let's break it down a little. Who should read this book? I think it's safe to say if you're someone who just enjoys a heartwarming story that leaves you feeling good, then Anne of Green Gables is for you. But to be a little more specific, if you're into beautifully written stories that just kind of sweep you away to another place and time.
And we can't forget about those flawed but lovable characters.
Right. Then you'll definitely love Anne of Green Gables. It's one of those timeless classics that people keep coming back to. It's all about hope, imagination, and connecting with others.
I love that.
Yeah.
But before we wrap things up, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier about those kindred spirits. That seems like a really big part of the book, and it got me thinking about how much Anne wants to find those connections and how that might resonate with readers today.
It's such a powerful idea, right? Anne just wants to be understood and accepted. I mean, she's this bright, energetic girl with a big imagination, but she's surrounded by people who are much more practical.
And she isn't afraid to say what she wants. I mean, she practically shouts kindred spirit from the rooftops.
She does. But that just shows how much she wants to find people she can be herself around completely, without being judged. It's something we all want, no matter how old we are.
It makes you think, what really makes a kindred spirit? Is it having the same interests or sense of humor, or is it something more?
That's a really good question, and I think it's worth thinking about. What do you look for in a kindred spirit? What makes you feel like someone really gets you?
I'll have to think about that. You know, one reader said something interesting. They called Anne an early ADHD icon. They pointed out how her thoughts are all over the place, which is pretty accurate.
That's true. The book never says Anne has any specific condition, but you can definitely see how she thinks and acts differently. She's impulsive and has these big emotions and so much energy.
Those are all things that maybe today we would see in a different light. We might even celebrate those things.
For sure. And I think that's another reason why people still love Anne of Green Gables. Anne doesn't fit in, and she refuses to change. And that speaks to anyone who's ever felt different or sees the world in their own way.
Yeah, it's like she's giving us permission to just be ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think we've covered pretty much everything about Anne of Green Gables. We talked about the writing, the characters, the themes, and even some of the adaptations.
We did. And hopefully we've given you enough information to decide if you want to read it or not.
But like always, you get to make the final decision. So here's what we want you to do. Go find a copy of Anne of Green Gables and see what you think. Let yourself get lost in the story of Avonlea. See if Anne's adventures spark your imagination and touch your heart. And maybe you'll even find yourself looking for those kindred spirits that make life a little bit better.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover, just like Anne, that the world is full of beauty, wonder, and unexpected connections. We just have to be open to finding them.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Anne of Green Gables. We'll see you next time for another literary adventure.